Batman Arkham City, a game that I love, that I've played through countless times, and one of my favorite Batman stories ever told. If you're watching this, you probably feel the same way and are very curious how a chump like me even thought he could rewrite the story of this now classic game in a satisfying way. I guess, luckily for me, we're on the same page. I started this video with an attempt to rewrite Arkham City. My goal wasn't even to rewrite the whole game. I wanted to keep the general story the same, and I definitely wanted to keep the endings of the two main storylines untouched, those involving Hugo Strange and the Joker. I respect this game and its creators far too much to dare tamper with the whole of what they crafted. My small rewrite idea was to try and give Mr. Freeze some more screen time. I set out to make this video all about what if Mr. Freeze attempted to use the Lazarus Pit on his wife Nora. However, after going through every possible scenario in my head for how I could implement this rewrite, I kept hitting dead end after dead end, with the slightest tweak here or there impacting the endgame. So, I took a step back, recognized my own folly in daring to rewrite this classic, and now this video has become something else entirely. Saying that I cannot rewrite Arkham City isn't to say the game is 100% perfect from a narrative point of view, but rather, structurally, it is extremely well knit. I'll explain with my own example. The conceit of my original rewrite came from a recent playthrough where I thought it was a bit odd that Mr. Freeze, a man obsessed with saving his wife from a life-threatening illness, didn't blink twice when Batman broke the news to him that he knows of a man who has lived for 600 years who is now dead, but who can be brought back to life. My plan was to try and figure out a way to give Mr. Freeze an even larger role in this game, just because I love his character so much, by pulling on that thread a little more. I knew it would be a bit of a challenge to do so without tampering with the endgame, but I've done a couple Arkham rewrites where I keep the base game the same and only tamper with the edges, so I thought I was up for the challenge. I was wrong. I tried to tackle this Mr. Freeze rewrite from every angle I could that didn't involve a significant change, and that's a testament to the excellent tight storytelling of this game. I couldn't tweak a single thing involving Mr. Freeze that wouldn't cause a butterfly effect that completely changed the ending, and I thought that was amazing. So instead of a rewrite, this video is a celebration of my defeat. Arkham City is a game that cannot be tampered with, and I want to offer my praise. I'm going to start my discussion off with the setup for the game to walk through how well it frames the narrative and explain the simple complexity of the storytelling on display. From the opening scene of the game, we are shown a painting symbolizing how it will end. This painting of Cain and Abel signifying the aftermath of the first murder is important on a narrative level as it ties into the ending of the game, but also is a significant look into Batman's psyche. In this comparison, Batman is Cain, the biblical first murderer who took the life of his own brother. I think anyone who played this game would say that Batman did not murder the Joker, and yet this image at the beginning of the game, which is also the first thing you see after beating the game and beginning a new Game Plus playthrough, connects in your mind Cain the murderer and Batman, which is more aligned with how Batman views himself after the Joker's death. By having a direct tie to such an infamous theological figure, the game manipulates the player's thinking to align more so with the hero's twisted view of events, which I thought was really excellent. And that's just the opening shot. This game starts off with some Catwoman hijinks, subverting expectations that you'll be playing as Batman right away, and we see the driving force for her side of the story in this game, as well as her ongoing conflict with Two-Face, which results in her capture. Following this, the real Bruce Wayne Batman opening of this game tells the player as much information as we need, and then some, in order to inform us of this foreign world. After the events of Arkham Asylum, Gotham has decided to section off part of the city and just dump criminals in there under the control of Hugo Strange. Bruce Wayne publicly battles against this and is kidnapped in the middle of a press conference by Strange's Tiger Guards for his dissidence. Hugo Strange knows Bruce Wayne is Batman and tells him that after the night is through, he will be a hero. Then we walk through the official entrance into Arkham City, seeing the chaos and cruelty of this prison, and are introduced to Penguin, a significant figure in the game. Afterwards, Bruce Wayne breaks free from his chains and puts on the cape and cowl, and now we're in it. Batman's goal is to stop Hugo Strange's sinister plan for Arkham City, but first, finding out what it actually is would be nice. I believe this is such impressive setup, and I really appreciate how no one other than Batman featured in this initial setup was included in Arkham Asylum. This opening serves to introduce the player to the world of this game and nearly all the new characters who will have significant story impacts. Catwoman, Two-Face, Hugo Strange, Penguin, hell, even Vicky Vale has a role later on. The only big players not from the previous game who are also not featured here are Mr. Freeze and the Al Ghouls, but their reveals are more so built up as surprises anyway. Only after the story kicks off do Harley, the Joker, the Riddler, Bane, and Zsasz begin to rear their ugly heads. I just think this opening is so masterfully crafted, and I wanted to give it its due. Even Easter eggs like with Deadshot, Jack Ryder, and Black Mask make replaying exciting. This story very much relies on Batman's point of view in order for everything to work. The player also doesn't know anything more than Batman does, outside of the Catwoman missions, which are very much unrelated until the end. You were on the journey with Batman to discover what Protocol 10 is, and this strict narrative perspective is vital to how the story shakes out toward the end, and is one of the core reasons I was unable to rewrite it successfully. Not only would a rewrite need to keep certain plot elements in place to build to the same ending, but it would also need to keep Batman's perspective intact, or he would approach events in the ending differently. Ultimately, the information Batman doesn't know is just as important as the information he does, and the two-pronged mystery he's trying to solve can only unfold the way it does because of the order in which Batman unravels the plot. It's very much structured like a classic hard-boiled detective story. If the detective pieces together an event earlier in the story than he's supposed to, that could lead to the story ending much quicker. Classic detective novels like The Maltese Falcon or The Big Sleep, or even modern thriller films such as Prisoners, rely heavily on the order of events unfolding exactly as written. Change one thing and the plot suddenly becomes a house of cards that collapses in on its own logic. Arkham City is no different, and I think it's genuinely impressive how the story is able to keep such a strict focus on Batman's point of view while planting seeds in the background that only makes sense with context later on. So, let me briefly walk through how the narrative unfolds in this game, the importance of Batman's perspective during these events, and how ultimately a satisfactory rewrite that doesn't completely break the ending nor overall story structure is nearly impossible. Following the introduction where Batman has no clue what Strange's plan is, he seeks help from someone within Arkham City who can give him information. That person just so happens to be his sexy cat friend who has been kidnapped by Two-Face. After some well-placed two puns, Catwoman tells Batman that she's never heard of Protocol 10, but she's heard rumors of Joker and Strange working together on a surprise for Batman, and then is nearly sniped in the head by Joker. This is important. Batman is basing his next moves on the word of Catwoman, who is really just expounding rumors, but the attempt on her life by the Joker solidifies in Batman's mind that Joker is somehow tied into Protocol 10. He goes to the sniper, finds Harley, and learns from Cash that Joker has kidnapped a doctor to treat him. Then, after investigating the sniper, he goes to question the Joker in the steel mill. This journey over to the other side of Arkham City also displays another small and perhaps underappreciated aspect of this game's storytelling: the atmospheric dialogue of the criminals around the prison. It's through these small bits of dialogue Batman overhears where a lot of the context for the narrative is given. These small lines that continue throughout the game are used well to build up mystery and reinforce narrative elements, either correct or incorrect, to the player as they free roam across the city. Each Arkham game uses the goons around town to their advantage, but I think Arkham City does it particularly well, and the continued reinforcement about Joker's illness from goons was a great way to subtly manipulate the player's perception of events. From here, Batman enters the steel mill where the rumors of Joker's illness are solidified by Harley torturing a doctor. Batman rescues her and finds out the Joker is still suffering from an illness caused by his dose of Titan formula during Arkham Asylum, and we are told that he's dying. Batman returns to confront Harley and finds the Joker plugged into medical equipment as his heart seemingly stops beating. When Batman scans the Joker's vitals, he is attacked by another, much healthier looking Joker. He then wakes up, strapped to a chair, with the Joker speaking to him from the shadows. Batman believes the rumors about his illness were all a lie, until the Joker steps forward and reveals his sickly face. He is ill, and has injected Batman with his blood, as well as sent it to multiple hospitals in Gotham, all because he wants Batman to find a cure for his illness. He then pushes Batman out the window to start his quest to find Mr. Freeze, who had been working on a cure before disappearing. There is so much information flying in Batman and the player's direction that it becomes difficult to sort through it all and get a clear picture on what is going on. The two Jokers don't really stand out as anything more than some trap played on Batman by his notorious prankster antagonist. It doesn't register as something more that needs to be thought about, But, looking back at it, knowing how the game ends, it's an obvious clue, and there are other such clues in this section. Harley telling the Joker he looks good as new off-screen and then being told to shut up is a great example of that. Batman is known as the world's greatest detective, and I'm sure there are people who will say how dumb Batman is for overlooking this detail, but he isn't a god. He's smart, but he's a man. A man who already had a lot on his mind before being infected with poisoned blood and finding out both his arch-nemesis and countless innocents in Gotham could die from that same blood. He was here to find out about Protocol 10 and instead got hit with a gaggle of other problems to worry about. I think it's valid from a story perspective for him to have overlooked this detail because as a player, you also let that detail go since everything else is propelling you forward. It's a really great beat that relies on perspective, and I think it's presented perfectly. The quest to get Mr. Freeze lands Batman at the Natural History Museum, aka the Iceberg Lounge, where Penguin and his gang are held up with Mr. Freeze as a hostage. From the main narrative itself, it is fairly clear that this version of the Penguin and the Joker are big-time criminal rivals, which explains why Penguin is holding Mr. Freeze from the Joker, but also, this game includes small stories you can unlock by completing riddles. The Penguin and Joker feud is just one of many in-depth details that the writers went out of their way to craft to provide even greater context for the game's story than was necessary, and I always appreciated that attention to detail for more curious players. Anyway, you know how this goes. You save Mr. Freeze, beat the shit out of this tiny man and his zombie slave, and rescue some GCPD officers along the way. During Batman's conversation with Mr. Freeze is actually where the idea for my initial rewrite came, when Batman tells Mr. Freeze he knows an immortal man, and Talia's ninja breaks out and escapes. The only real criticism I have of how the characters in this game are written comes in this scene, where I think Mr. Freeze acts a little too uninterested in news of an immortal man who can come back to life. I think if he were allowed to act organically rather than constrained by the rest of the narrative, he'd at the very least have some more questions and, at the very most, do whatever he can to find the source of this immortality in order to study it for Nora. So instead of walking through the rest of this story beat for beat, let me talk through my thought process on how I initially went about trying to rewrite this game and each of the various roadblocks I ran into that stopped me from doing so. I think that will paint a picture of an extremely tight story structure for which this video is a massive jerk-off session for. My plan was to allow this initial Mr. Freeze conversation to go the same way, because Batman does need to pursue the ninja, and I'm not sure Mr. Freeze would want to tip his hand that he's scheming something so soon. So Batman would chase the ninja, mentally abuse Robin, and then go down into the remains of Wonder Tower and confront Ra's al Ghul just like he did in the original. He needs Ra's blood in order for Freeze to complete the formula, and Freeze would have no reason to interfere in that process. Thus, my idea for the rewrite would take effect once Batman returns to Freeze with the blood. In the original game, this results in Freeze trying some hard negotiations in order to get Batman to find Nora for him, which results in their iconic battle. At first, I thought about just shifting Freeze's request for Nora to instead be to access the Lazarus Pit. However, Nora has to be kidnapped by the Joker in order for the story to work. It's the only reason Freeze would be helping the Joker to begin with. So instead, I had to come up with a way for Freeze to still demand Nora's return and also to bring him to the Lazarus Pit. I think Freeze demanding these two things of Batman would more logically lead to a battle, since in the original version, Batman just kicks this cold guy's ass because he wants his wife back. If Freeze demanded that, and access to the pit, then a fight is a more reasonable response. I also didn't want to change the boss battle because it's so iconic and spectacular, so in theory, I could have written around it, but why ruin things? After the fight, I was stuck on how I'd proceed, but then I remembered something. There is another character in the GCPD building during this fight, Harley Quinn. If you remember, she steals the cure that Freeze developed from the safe during their fight, but if I simply had Mr. Freeze store the cure within his suit instead of some cheap-looking safe, Harley wouldn't have been able to do that. Instead, she could get caught sneaking around after the fight by Freeze, and he could use her as leverage to get Batman to do what he wanted. If Batman doesn't find Nora, then he won't get the cure, and if he doesn't tell him more about the pit, then Freeze will kill Harley. It would be a simple enough change to have Batman go find Nora as part of the main story instead of a side quest, and by using Harley as a bargaining chip, then Freeze could realistically get Batman to provide him with more information about the Lazarus Pit that would give him more screen time later on. I thought I had cracked it. I thought that simple change to Harley was the key to this rewrite, but it breaks the entire game. This ties back into what I was saying earlier about how Batman's perspective is vital to how this narrative progresses. In the original version, the only reason that Batman goes back to the steel mill in the first place is because Harley steals the cure. At first, I thought that Harley being absent from the steel mill would just mean she wouldn't be tied up, which only serves as a little hint as to Talia's actions during that level, and it's not that big of a deal. Since Harley doesn't have any overt narrative significance to the steel mill, it didn't occur to me just how vital she actually was to the entire Joker plotline that leads to the end. If Harley doesn't steal the cure from Freeze, the entire ending changes. Without Harley getting her hands on the cure, then Batman would have zero reason to return to the steel mill, nor would he have any reason to believe that the Joker had taken the cure. Without Batman knowing that Harley took the cure, and believing she had made it to Joker with it, then Batman would never nearly be defeated by Joker, Talia would never have any need to pretend to ally herself with Joker, and thus, the entire Joker ending of the game would change, and Talia would never die. In fact, the Joker probably wouldn't die either, since at the end of the game, Batman admits that he would have cured the Joker if given the chance. Everything I've described is not explicitly laid out for the player, the events involving Harley don't reveal themselves until the very end, but the story is so tightly written that by changing something as simple as the off-screen behavior of, frankly, a bumbling sidekick, the entire narrative crumbles, and I think that's so impressive. Not only does the game provide you with an explicit hint that Harley never made it to the Joker, but that hint in retrospect is the key to understanding how everything involving Talia and the Joker plays out, and leads to the dramatic ending that was alluded to all the way at the beginning of the game with the painting of Cain and Abel. Sure, I could write things so that for some reason after Batman tells Freeze what he wants to know, then Freeze lets Harley go and stalls Batman a little longer to give her a head start. I guess, in theory, then everything could fall into place, but that feels like a cheap cop-out that is out of character for Freeze. I could also make big changes that could dramatically alter the entire story structure and create a three-pronged plot focusing on Joker, Strange, and Freeze, but that also feels cheap and not in the spirit of a real rewrite, staying in the bounds of the established narrative. Also, there is a time limit that is hanging over the game, so there isn't too much time to add any more big story beats before Protocol 10. I understand that the example I'm using to prove that this game is nearly impossible to satisfactorily rewrite is very specific and focused only around Mr. Freeze, but I also don't think there's really anything else within the game that needs rewriting. I agree, Two-Face kinda gets the shaft in this game, but what would a rewrite add to the story, and more importantly, what could it take away? Perhaps there are those out there who could find the perfect edit for this story, but I simply cannot. All in all, I'm happy that I was defeated so thoroughly by the writers of Arkham City. This was a bit of an odd one. However, I wanted to discuss just how impressive this game still is to me all these years later in a more unique way than just going beat for beat and telling you what you already know. Although, I'm curious, just to satiate my own ego, would you have liked to see more Mr. Freeze in this game? Would him accessing the Lazarus Pit be something interesting to you? In another universe, maybe him using it on Nora could have set her up as a unique villain for the sequel game. Let me know if my original idea was even worth pursuing, and let me know your thoughts on the story of Arkham City. Do you think it could use a rewrite? Do you have any ideas how to tackle a specific rewrite? I'd really like to read that in the comments if you do. Thank you so much for watching this far, I really appreciate it.